Okay, so I've tried to make this video about 4 times now, and this is it. This is the last time. I'm going to try not to ramble on too much about certain aspects. I'm going to try not to miss anything this time around, but we have to talk about the Ricoh GR3 and how I think it's the best compact camera that money can buy today. Let's just start off with a little bit of history of it, right? The Ricoh GR series has been a long-running series from Ricoh that starts with film cameras and moves all the way up through early digital age. And this right here is a Ricoh GR Digital 3, which was a smaller sensor than what you get in this APS-C size body for the GR3. And then they transitioned to making the bigger sensors that we now have today. And I really think that's important to note because they've really not changed a whole lot when it comes to these bodies, even from the earlier days. They've just been refining that process, and I think it shows when we start to talk about the body and the handling of this camera, which I'll get into right now. The overall body of this camera, it's magnesium alloy build. It's pretty solid. What you will notice if you first pick this up and you move it around is that you'll hear some rattling in there, and that's just the sensor moving around because the GR3 has in-body image stabilization, and when the camera's off, the electromagnets aren't active, so it moves around, but once you turn it on, that goes away. So there's really nothing to be alarmed about there. So just giving you a brief overview of the buttons that are available on this camera. Once we turn our attention to the top, we'll see that there's a dial here, rotational dial on the top. You have a nice big oval shutter button that's easy to press and not easy to confuse with the power button. You have a round power button, and then you have a mode down the top that covers all your priority modes, manual mode, program mode, and then you have 3 custom user modes that save everything about the camera, all the settings of the camera into those modes so you can quickly recall them. On the left side, you'll find a lone button for the movie and or wireless function, and then on the back you'll see that we have a playback button in the top here. We have a 4-way D-pad and a rotational dial around that, and then we have a jog dial that also depresses for extra functionality on the back here. And then we have our menu button, display, and a function button, a customizable function button. And that's pretty much it. When it comes to handling, when you put all that together, as you see here, this grip, even though this camera is tiny and small, this grip is pretty wide. And to me, that makes all the difference for my big hands when I start to grip this camera. And then it has a nice, decent little bump on the back that allows you to really hold on to it. Like I said, their previous bodies had a pretty similar shape. They just tweaked it over the years, made it a little bit better. So they really have learned from just staying the course and just slightly modifying and not fixing what isn't broken in most situations. And why I say that is because all the previous bodies, in my experience at least, had this one difference. You'll notice they don't have that rotational dial on the D-pad, and they had this plus or minus button here, which allowed you to adjust things like exposure compensation intuitively, and then other aspects of exposure when you were in different modes. And of course, like I showed you already, they got rid of that. They put the playback button there, and then they built this functionality in here. And for me, that's where the build quality issues came in for me. Everything else is really solid, but I've had 2 problems with this camera that have been a little disappointing, if I'm being honest. So the first of them is that, most of you probably already noticed that my D-pad, there's no legends on it, there's no markings on it, and that's because the little middle part of that completely fell out one day as I was using it. I don't know how that happened. It's just going in and out of my pocket, and I looked and it wasn't there, and I wasn't able to find it. And what I can tell, the little nub is broken in the middle there. So this is something that will have to be repaired probably by Ricoh whenever I get around to that. It still functions because you can push the middle in. It's just hard to push that little tiny nub in the middle there, so it's a little disappointing. Other than that, and more importantly, but still related to this jog dial, is that I have an issue with this when I rotate it, that it doesn't really, I think it must be gunked up, or there must be dust or something in there, because it doesn't really register correctly with the camera. And I can probably demonstrate that for you really quickly. If we come into here and I change the ISO. So if you see here, okay. So if you look at the bottom of the screen here, you'll see the ISO function. So normally you'd rotate this left or right to change it. as you watch that number, as I turn this in one direction, you'll see it's struggling, I imagine. I can't see it, but I bet you it's struggling. It's getting stuck. It might even be going backwards at certain times. It's just not a smooth operation. And to me, that makes it borderline unusable at times, which is very frustrating because I really do love to shoot in manual mode. So that's something I need to send it in for as well. I've seen some people that have tried compressed air and just working it, turning it around, and those things work for me for a period of time, but they usually always end up reverting. So for me, I think I'm just gonna have to send that in. So that's unfortunate. So those are the two issues I've had with durability and build quality of this. But other than that, I think it's a great experience, and everything falls into the right place. If you saw the buttons that that you kind of adjust here that I showed you, everything falls within reach of the index finger and the thumb. And so you can operate pretty much everything about this camera with those two fingers, which really frees up the way you can shoot with this and kind of gives you a unique experience. And you combine that with the fact that you've only got the LCD on the back, as you saw. There's no EVF anywhere, although you can put an OVF on top. I don't. You combine that with that shooting experience of back screen only, with the fact that you can move and position this anywhere, right, when taking a photo. And it actually makes it a pretty flexible setup as opposed to something that's bigger, larger, and that you kind of want to get into a viewfinder for. It kind of can give you a unique perspective if you use this the right way. So moving on from body and handling, let's talk about the performance and usability of this camera. So the first thing to start off with on the bottom here is this battery compartment, which also shares the door for the SD card. These batteries are small, right? They're not big, they're tiny, really, which obviously physics-wise, it wouldn't bode well for battery life. However, what I can say is that the speed in which this camera can start up and shut down really helps extend that battery life beyond what it really has any business doing, in my opinion. So you'll see here when I push this power button and this extends, it's already ready to shoot when that happens. So that's on just as fast as it turns off. And if I show you on the back just to demonstrate, on, ready to shoot, off, done, right? So it's a really fast operation when it comes to turning this camera on and off, which for me allows me to I just don't leave the camera on when I'm not using it. When I'm not actively shooting, I turn this camera off, even if I have it in my hand, and I quickly can turn it on and grab a shot whenever I need to, which allows me to conserve battery life. And I can stretch one of these little batteries out for a day of shooting for me. But if you're a heavier handed shooter, these batteries are cheap, they're light, you can stuff a couple in your pocket and take them with you in case you end up running them down. But that's one tip I would say, don't leave it on if you don't need to, otherwise you will absolutely drain that battery pretty quickly. Other aspects of speed for this camera, the autofocus speed. In good lighting, daylight, outdoors, whatever the case may be, it's nice and snappy, it's confident, it's accurate. I have no issues with the autofocus in good lighting. It will begin to struggle in low light or low contrast situations though, which I think is, for a camera released in 2019, within that 2-year range, like that's pretty, I think that's par for the course pretty much, especially for mirrorless type cameras. So there's really, it's not really a downside, but just something to keep in mind. This is not really a camera that's great for focusing on low contrast objects at night. It will struggle, it will hunt, and it can be frustrating at times. Now there is an autofocus illuminator on the front. If you're into that, I always disable those on my camera. So I don't know if that would help you in those situations where the autofocus is struggling at night, but I just always turn them off. One unique feature when it comes to the speed of this camera for focusing is that Ricoh has always offered what they call their snap focus feature. And so what that is, for those who don't know, is the camera lets you set a predetermined focus distance that will actuate when you fully depress the shutter without half pressing to let the autofocus catch. So what that means is you can be autofocusing around doing things, and then you see something that's at, let's say, 3 meters from you. And if you have your camera set to 3 meters, you can just point it in that direction, push it all the way down, and it's going to capture that and focus at that distance, even if you were focused up close or at infinity, for instance. And this is something that is extremely helpful if you understand the principles of zone focusing and depth of field, and you're good at gauging distances. You combine that with those principles for street or other activities, and it makes this camera extremely quick, extremely fast. You combine that with the startup and shutdown time. If you can develop your eye, right, where you've now seen things in 28 millimeters, you wouldn't even need to use the back LCD. You can look in that direction, know what your lens is going to capture, snap focus, push the button. You can have stuff captured in sub 1 second time periods from over here to over there. And so it's a very powerful tool when you combine all those things. And I really appreciate that they continue to put that feature into their cameras, and it's unique to this series. And then lastly, on the speed and performance of this camera is that the overall operation is quick. The startup shutdown is fast, of course, but even reviewing images, scrolling through them, there's no slowdowns, there's no waiting, and you can use this jog dial to scroll through them quickly, or just push the D-pad and things work as expected. So really no issues there. From a usability standpoint, all of that combines to a very usable platform. The one thing I will say that I wish the body did have is I wish the screen could tilt, so you can do some waist level view, waist level shooting, and just get make it easier to get different angles with this camera, because that back LCD is all you have. So if it's in a weird position where you can't see it, you're kind of out of luck there. And so if they had a tiltable LCD, that would be nice. Of course, if they also had weather sealing, if they could somehow build that in with a lens that extends in and out, that would be nice, because then it would truly be a take anywhere camera at any time. But other than that, I think the usability on this camera is top notch, superb, great handling, good body design, very thoughtful design. They really learned from their past iterations. So moving on to the last thing to talk about really is the image quality. And I'll start with the negative, which is that video button. Don't bother with the video. This thing takes video, it sucks, 1080p, just doesn't look great. Forget it ever has it. When it comes to stills though, this lens is special. I don't know how Ricoh builds this type of quality into a lens of this size, but it's just amazing to me. It's sharp at 2.8 pretty much across the frame. It does get a little sharper if you stop down, of course, but it's more than usable from wide open for anything. There is a little bit of vignetting at wide open that clears up by f4, f5.6. It's also correctable in post, of course. But other than that, I think it's very usable at 2.8. So if your light gathering needs necessitate it, you can shoot this wide open all day if you want to. But it really does. It's super crisp when you stop down to, your more street style apertures, your f8s, 7.1, 5.6. It's crispy all the way across the frame. I don't notice any issues with chromatic aberrations or anything like that, although I don't shoot a lot of things that would bring that out with this camera personally. So there's nothing to be concerned there for me, at least. Bokeh is, this is a 28 millimeter 2.8, or 18 millimeter really, technically, 2.8 on an APS-C sensor. The bokeh is not going to be fantastic. You're not going to get a lot of separation, but if you do get close to your subjects, you can get a decent amount of separation. And it has a macro mode that allows you to get surprisingly close, and then that of course will blur the background out. So depending on what you're trying to isolate, the possibility is there, but just know what you're getting yourself into. If you want more subject separation and more bokeh, I guess you want to look at the GR3X that was just announced with the 40mm equivalent lens. So that's basically the lens. The lens is fantastic. All those things I just said is great, but it doesn't matter if the sensor is paired with sucks, and that's not the case here. So this 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor is competitive still in today's market. I know this camera was only released 2 years ago, so of course it's competitive, but the colors are good coming off of this. They're a little muted in the raw DNG files, but that's easily changed in post, nothing to be concerned about. But the colors are good. The dynamic range is solid. It could be a little bit better, I think, but the dynamic range is good with this camera, and the sharpness, with that lens combination is fantastic. The only other thing I'll say is that high ISO performance. I wish it was a little bit better when you start getting up into 6400 ISO when you find yourself in those situations, but it's more than usable, and at up to 3200 I have no problem using it all. High ISO, sure, could get a little bump by today's standards, but it's still good. this camera's still usable, obviously, for that. And I think it's definitely a big step ahead of what you got out of the GR2. So there's no question there, high ISO out of this camera is good when you compare it to where we came from before. The last thing to add on to the image quality section, I would say, is that the in-body image stabilization really extends the shooting envelope of this camera. It allows me in low light situations to lower my ISO and get down to, handhold shots at 1/15, 1/10. I've even gone down to 1 full second exposure and gotten sharp images. It took me a couple times, but it's doable with this. And to me, that's amazing. It really adds a lot of flexibility, particularly when you're shooting scenes that, where motion blur is not going to become an issue. When you combine all these things I talk about, the image quality, you just get good results, right? And this little tiny camera has no business outputting the type of files that you're getting with this. It's funny to me when I've taken either a DSLR or a larger mirrorless camera with a similar focal length on it and held it up next to this, and it's just it just doesn't make any sense, right? That I can get the same exact image, essentially, where you wouldn't be able to tell the difference from something that could fit in my front pocket here. You're not fitting that huge camera anywhere. So overall, this is the camera that I reach for when I really don't want to bring something big and heavy. It's the camera I bring when I don't want to bring a camera, and then I'm always happy I did, because an opportunity, a moment will present itself, and I'm glad I'm able to capture it with the quality that this camera offers. The question for you, I guess, would be, is the quality of this better than what you're getting out of today's modern smartphone cameras? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I'm pretty sure physics-wise you can't beat this when it comes to that, but computationally they're getting pretty good. So maybe I'll do a video comparing those two things, because the focal length for most camera phones is pretty similar. But I would still say that this is worth having and worth putting in your pocket and using instead of a cell phone when it comes to just capturing your daily life, everyday moments, just opportunities that present themselves when you don't have a bigger setup on you. And even if you do have a bigger setup, you don't really lose anything using this, as long as you're able to use a 28mm equivalent 2.8 lens for whatever use case you're asking for. You're not compromising on that image quality here. So I would say that this is definitely worth having that scenario. The one thing you have to ask yourself too is it worth getting this, or do you save a lot of money, especially on the used market, and get a Ricoh GR2, or do you go to a different brand and get a different competitor? And for me, if I was answering that question for myself, if I need a compact camera I can put in my pocket, there are no other competitors from other brands that I would consider. You have the Fuji system. Those cameras aren't small enough to me. They're not really that pocketable. The X100 is too big. The other 28mm equivalent Fuji bodies they offer are a little slower, a little outdated. They've kind of abandoned those, in my opinion. And they're also not as small as this, because their lenses don't collapse. So you really don't I can put these in skinny jeans. You can't do that with any of those, right? And then when you look outside of Fuji, if you consider, I guess, the Sony RX100 series, to me, it's like comparing apples and oranges. That's got an EVF. It's got a zoom lens. It's a much smaller sensor. I think, and because of that, I think the shooting envelope is a lot smaller with regards to good low light performance, because this has in-body image stabilization. So yeah, I think that there's really not many competitors to this, and really what you're looking at is comparing within the brand, right? Ricoh versus Ricoh. Should you get a GR2, a GR1, or a GR3? And for me, the savings of the GR1 over these is not worth it. The GR2, however, is still worth it at, I think you usually get those $300-400 or so, around that ballpark, $400, whereas this is gonna run you about $750 used. So if you're comparing those two, the things you gain from a GR2 is that you get a flash, you get a built-in flash, which this lost for the in-body image stabilization. That's useful for a lot of people. For me, not so much, because I would just throw this in a bag or in my other pocket or something if I needed a flash. And we can talk about this little interesting flash another time. But yeah, so you get a built-in flash, and you get the better color of positive film. To me, that's the main benefit of the GR2, is those two things. The GR3, you get higher megapixel count, so more resolution there. The body is slightly smaller, especially width-wise this way, than what the GR2 was. and you get in-body image stabilization, and you get faster autofocus and better high ISO performance. So for me, if you can stretch the budget a little bit, I would go for the GR3. If not, the GR2 is still very much a formidable camera, and there's you know, if you're looking to spend $400, there's little reason not to pick that camera up, because it still shoots fantastic photos. So that's pretty much it for this review. Hopefully you found that helpful. I mean, I've been shooting this camera for about a year or so now, a little bit over a year. And yeah, it's definitely, I wouldn't say it's my favorite camera ever, but it's definitely my most carried camera outside of my phone. I take this more places than I take any other camera I own. And to me, if you need something like that, if you're the type to not really take photos because you don't want to haul a camera around, take a look at this. It might be worth your time. If you can deal with the 28mm focal length, grab this one. If you're into more of a 40, you know, or closer to 35 to 50, get that GR3X, and I think you'll be happy. You'll be happily taking pictures wherever you go, because this will always be in your pocket and always by your side. So that's it for me. Hopefully you enjoyed that, and hopefully I'll see you on the next one. All right, peace.